Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and I'm a Forbes contributor covering social entrepreneurship and impact investing. We have two great guests for you today. Our guests are Dr. Moira Wren and Dr. Laura Lemle. Laura, Moira, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
We're thrilled. We're thrilled to have you. Laura, you have launched a nonprofit called the NVLD Project. First, tell us what NVLD is.
NVLD stands for Nonverbal Learning Disability, and it is a learning disability which we say is a spatial social learning disability. And often those who have it have trouble reading social cues.
Very good. Now, Moira, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about what people experience who have NVLD.
Sure. Just to build upon the great description Laura had provided, I think one of the key features of this learning disability is the social issues. This is a real struggle for children and adults that have this difficulty. They have a hard time interpreting social cues, social interactions. When you hear a learning disability, one often thinks of like the more classic, you could say, dyslexia, where it is about pronunciation of words or the reading aspect. For children that are struggling with this learning disability, it's a host of different symptoms, and it can also include reading comprehension, and as well as difficulty with math, particularly solving math problems. But another core feature is sort of understanding the interpretation of words, sentences, understanding the meaning of communication when they're interacting with another individual, and it can make life really challenging. There are other associated things as well, like difficulty with handwriting. So they may have, handwriting that looks sloppy. There can also be motor in coordination issues with this as well. And then there's also spatial issues, as Laura had mentioned, for these young people. So there's a range of symptoms that come together to cause challenges in the learning environment.
Laura, your daughter was diagnosed with this syndrome. What did she experience? Tell us a little bit about what that was like, trying to figure out what was wrong and how to help her.
My daughter was a little bit different by the time she was a baby. She didn't move as much, and when she started preschool, she didn't engage in roof activities in the playground. She really observed. So it was clear to me that she stood apart from the other children. And then there was a social piece, which she wasn't socially engaged in the way that the other children were. I didn't really know at the time, because she was 3, what it really was. And then by the time she was 4, her teacher noticed she was really different. And then really she got an IQ test when she was 4, and she had a major difference between how she did in the verbal section and how she did in the performance section, which is the spatial section. And having a PhD in clinical psychology, I also realized that she must have some kind of learning disability.
Interesting. Interesting. And so that's when did you launch, relative to her age, when did you launch the NVLD Project?
I launched the NVLD Project in 2013. So
and how old was your daughter then?
My daughter in 2013 was 22.
Okay, so by that time, you had her whole lifetime of experience to guide you in figuring out what were the interventions, therapies, treatments, accommodations that helped your daughter, right?
I knew what helped, and I also knew what didn't work.
What are some of the things that worked, and what are some of the things that didn't?
The things that worked were she was really helped with her academic difficulties. That really worked. She became a really good student. What never really worked is we never really found the right school for her. So that she really never felt totally integrated within a school, and that never worked. And that's what also inspired me to start the NVLD Project, was to try to do something to create an opportunity for other people and to give back.
Yeah. Now, Moira, I wonder if you would address an interesting question. One of our readers already asked why this is not a universally accepted diagnosis. What is the question that remains?
Right. So that's a very good question. It has been considered for inclusion in I think you had mentioned the DSM-5, so that for those that may not be aware of what that is, in psychiatry, it really is a large book that really has the details and the descriptions of each possible psychiatric disorder that's recognized. And it's a document, and a large document, that provides information in such a way that clinicians are using the same types of symptoms to identify or to determine if somebody actually has a diagnosis. So let's just take for depression, there's just core symptoms that one needs to meet, and several of them, in order to be diagnosed with depression, and that's outlined in this DSM-5. And it's recently went under revision, and there was a lot of conversation amongst the various experts about adding this in actually as a diagnosis. But the process that's put into that is they really look carefully at what's the amount of literature in the field available to support that this is a diagnosis, and that the symptoms that we identify, the things that Laura and I have mentioned as being symptoms for this learning disability, does it really exist in its entirety on its own, or can some of these problems be explained by another disorder that we actually already have in the DSM-5. So, for example, the one thing Laura and I had mentioned was this difficulty in catching and understanding social cues, or the tone of people's voices, or understanding when someone's being sarcastic versus sad or funny, and those challenges that children with nonverbal learning disability has. Can you see that? Is that in any other type of disorder, and so could it be better explained by that? So what could that be? Well, so for example, we do have a disorder called social anxiety disorder, and that's where children really feel incredibly shy, self-conscious. They don't feel comfortable expressing themselves because they think they may be evaluated by other people. And so, one could say, well, gosh, could that be the same thing? Now, we think that it's not, because it's not necessarily that a child with nonverbal learning disability is necessarily self-conscious. They're really trying to get in there and have that conversation, but they are missing ability to interpret the rhythm and the way of the back and forth of the conversation. So this is one of the wonderful gifts that Laura, through her foundation, is providing us, is that we have launched a project to evaluate these types of issues about nonverbal learning disability, and looking at the different symptoms, and really working with the DSM-5 to show that, in fact, we do think that it warrants a position in the manual. And it's going to be it's a real research process where you bring experts together and you identify the symptoms, and then you try to actually provide data to support that this disorder does exist in itself in its entirety, without other overlapping or being completely like other disorders. So we'll be looking at large data sets where children have been assessed for a range of learning disabilities, and sort of examining those symptoms. And we have a terrific faculty member here at Columbia University, Dr. Prudence Fisher, who's leading that endeavor, who has expertise in studying psychometric properties of disorders. And through Laura's work and her foundation, we're able to I'm sure we'll accomplish this. We're in the midst of launching this and getting started. We're very excited about it.
Laura, I wonder if you would tell us what challenges you have faced as you've tried to organize this nonprofit. Like every entrepreneurial venture, I'm sure it hasn't been all roses.
No, it's been challenging. It's very challenging to essentially, as a business, market something that technically doesn't exist. So that's been a first challenge. It's been a challenge initially it was a challenge to figure out how to establish it and make an effective nonprofit. The other thing that's been challenging is the name of nonverbal learning disability, because it really reflects the disability and not the ability. And so when you communicate and you're trying to raise awareness, people often think that you're talking about people who can't speak. And so the first part of the conversation is also explaining how terrible the name of the diagnosis is. And that's one of the reasons that we're calling it a spatial social learning disability, so that people understand initially what it is and what it's not.
Yeah. Now, Moira, all of us from time to time miss social cues. You know, as I put in the article, that's probably the most fertile ground for comedy writers of sitcoms, right? Is
right.
to describe people who miss obvious social cues. But we all do it. What's the difference clinically between someone who does that occasionally, as we all do, and someone who really doesn't get it? Help us draw that clinical distinction.
Right. Well, if I could just comment, that's a difficulty that we have, you know, with all psychiatric illnesses, you know, except for those that are very extreme. So, for example, depression, you know, sadness is a part of everyone's life. And so where do you draw the line when sadness is truly a problem? And it's the same thing for this, in terms, you're absolutely right. We all have our good days and bad days when people say, oh, I'm off today, and they realize they put their foot in their mouth and feel terrible about that. We've all had those days. But this is a real pervasive presence in the child's life, where they are really feeling, if you think about it, you're not putting your foot in your mouth every second throughout the day. That's the experience of these children, that they are really feeling that, you know, people aren't understanding them, they're not getting included with other children, the parents notice that they're not getting invited to play dates, the teachers are commenting the interactions in classroom that the child is consistently having difficulty socially. These children have amazing vocabulary often and speak very well, and they're having a desire to have social interaction, but it's just constant that they lack their, you know, feeling like they're failing and not having success with it and not able to maintain friendships, and it leads to sadness and frustration and development of low self-esteem and a whole host of other difficulties. So it's really an impairment, and that's like with anything. It's like it's really getting in the way of everyday, you know, typical social interactions that you would expect for a child in school, and then is it also leading to academic difficulty?
That really helps. That really helps. Now, Laura, I want to just ask you, while we've got you as a social entrepreneur, I want to just tap into your experience, your persona here a little bit. You're becoming a role model to a lot of people. People admire you for the work that you're doing with the NVLD Project. Who do you look up to as a role model?
I really admire my daughter, who inspired me to start the NVLD Project. And she really inspired me because she's really been tenacious, and she's persevered despite having nonverbal learning disability, despite people not understanding what it is, despite really, I mentioned before, we really never found the right school for her. And she was socially marginalized, and it's been a real journey. And some examples of what she's gone through is when she was 4, her teacher told me she certainly marched to her own unique drum. When she was 6, I think Moira told you, they're often precocious readers and great spellers. She read all the books for 1st grade by the time it was Thanksgiving, and the teacher told me that she doesn't think like other children. And by the time she was in high school, she loves music and she plays guitar, and it was band day, and she had no one to play with. So despite having nobody to play with, she performed in front of the school by herself. And she didn't give up. And she was not in the right school, although the school was very supportive, and she persevered and performed and showed a lot of courage. And she's still showing a lot of courage, and to the point where I really inspired me to say this is really important to do this, not only inspired by her, but to give back to other people.
Well, that's great. I appreciate you sharing that.
Devin, could I say one thing?
Please do.
Besides, I really admire Laura and her daughter, too, because it's leading to all this great change and work. I think one thing I'm realizing and listening to Laura, what's really important for anyone that may listen to this video, if they have a concern about their child, there's something Laura said very important in the beginning, was getting the neuropsychological evaluation, and that they picked up that what she was calling this difference between the verbal and the spatial. And we often, it's like a technical term, calling a split, and that's sort of the first evidence that clinicians like myself will look at that and notice that, because children may not have the typical learning issues and they often don't get identified. That's really true for learning disabilities across the board, unfortunately. Children often are identified until they're 8, 9, 10 years old, until they've actually failed to succeed in a classroom. And so it's really good to, if you have a concern, to really get the right type of assessment, and you want a neuropsychological assessment to evaluate for that. And that's really, and the sooner the better. When a parent, when the mother says, I know something's wrong, go with your gut. Moms and dads are often right in to get that help.
Oh, that's great. Well, Moira, let me ask you too. Who do you look up to and admire?
I think for my work of working with children and young people, and my passion about young people having the best lives possible, both for their mental health and also for educational opportunities, Malala Yousafzai is someone who I really admire. That is a young person who was quite remarkable at early age as a child in Pakistan, saying, girls need to get educated. We need to get good education. And then, also this awful, horrible event that occurred. And then she's continuing out there advocating for the need for all young people for their equality for education around the world, and for children to be well cared for. I think she's just a remarkable, really remarkable young woman.
Well, she is a remarkable young woman, and I certainly admire her as you do. Laura, I wonder if we ask all of our guests for what I call an impact hack, a tip that would help us do more good in the world, and you're certainly doing good. What would you recommend as an impact hack?
I'm not sure I understand. I couldn't hear it, sorry.
So we're looking for a suggestion that would help us to do more good in the world. What do you think?
Well, I think when you come up with an idea or you want to do something to give back, do it. Don't let fear stop you. Don't let obstacles stop you. I think you really just need to be tenacious and persevere and do what you need to do. And don't look at all the opportunities. I think one of the things that was so helpful to me in starting the NVLD project was to be open and seeing where the opportunity arose, because you never know where it is. And if you want to do something, you just have to be open to the opportunity and then capitalize on it.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. Moira, what about you? What would you recommend as an impact hack?
Right. So Laura took my number one, which is perseverance, which I think this kind of work you have to persevere. And we are going to persevere about the diagnosis of the DSM-5. It's going to be a lot of work, and you got to stick with it. But the other thing is collaboration. And you see this collaboration that Laura and I have, and Laura has with the work that we're doing here at Columbia, and we're collaborating outside of Columbia with other experts across the country. So collaboration, I think, is really key to get other people's thoughts and ideas.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank both of you for taking the time to be with us today. Laura, before we go, please tell people how they can learn more about the NVLD Project.
You can learn more about the NVLD Project by going to our website at nvld.org. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And we welcome all visits. We welcome people who are interested in giving. We welcome people who are interested in helping, and we are looking forward to hearing from anybody interested.
Fantastic. Now, Laura, how can people learn more about your work at Columbia University?
So actually, all the work that we're doing, that's okay, we're very similar names. It's actually on the NVLD Project website. So we're linked together, so we can keep it simple and easy for everybody. You can find it there.
Okay, great.
You can always put Columbia University in as well. But
fantastic. It's great to have both of you on the show. I wish you every success in your efforts to help people and families that are experiencing NVLD.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Let's do some good.